He's never fought us. Not us united.
My favorite moment in the entire... Maybe I should complicate this before I start speaking here.
Welcome to Comics League. I'm Jared, and I got Taladia Plays with me. What's up, brother?
Hey, what's up, guys?
Nick and Jay Heat should be on here anytime, and I'll let them in. So tonight, today actually, we're talking about nostalgia, and more specifically, the times when that actually is hurting the comic book industry and the comic book movie industry, particularly as it applies to the SnyderVerse, because one of the chief criticisms that I've heard, or like one of the chief directions that people want the DCU to go, is the direction of the DCAU, because that's the direction that people grew up on. In other words, they wanted DC to be like it was when they grew up. And honestly, the problem with that, Taladia, is that it seems to me like it's creatively like stifling, honestly.
Yeah.
Like a little bit.
Like, I remember back in the day when people used to say, like, oh, I wish this was like the DCAU. I wish that some of the Snyder films had the tone, or not the tone, but had set up like how the DC animated universe did in the 90s, where it started off with Batman, Superman, then had Justice League and whatnot, and so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the template. That was the template for DC back in the day. But because they did a different way, because the Snyderverse essentially was Man of Steel, BVS, Justice League. Well, we won't count Justice League because we don't need to count that.
Yeah.
But Zack Snyder's Justice League, and then they did Wonder Woman. So they did before Zack Snyder Justice League, they did Wonder Woman, and then they had just Zack Snyder Justice League. Then had Aquaman, Shazam, and then so on and so forth. But it for me, the nostalgia feeling for DC at the moment is like just rewatching those films and just remembering how those films were made back in the day, because those were done on IMAX, if you remember.
Yeah.
And these days you do have like 4D, 3D, you have 3D, 4D screenings and so on and so forth, right? And there is that is pretty cool, but at the end of the day, I think IMAX is the best way to go. And when it comes down to the Snyderverse itself, I think they did the cool thing, which was, I know they jumped the gun a little bit early, but that's not down on Zack Snyder, and that's not down
That's
on
Warner Brothers.
that was down to Warner Media, not Warner Brothers, Warner Media.
Oh yeah.
Because everyone gets confused on who's the people that actually took the shots, and that was Warner Media at the time, taking digs, Jeff Johns, um, and his cronies, like the clown table essentially were just like saying, "Oh, we want to rush everything and skip a Batman film before doing, a Batman and Superman team up film." They really skipped that part, which I think that was a dumb move on Warner Media's part.
Mm-hmm.
And if they did the way I would have done it, which was Man of Steel, a Batman film. The Batman film essentially is like you see Batman's point of view, but in that film, the Batman film essentially you get to see his Ben Affleck's version basically being um going through the stages of how can we you know
How,
set up
you mean
the
how he got so dark and all that?
yeah, how he got so dark, how he got so gritty, and then in a flashback scene, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And
That works.
then then fast forward to Metropolis in Man of Steel, like you get to see that particular scene that he did in BVS would be there still.
Mm-hmm.
It was the end of the film, but that would set up BVS
Mm-hmm.
Ultimate Edition.
That works.
That's how I would have done it,
Also,
because
the way I would do BVS is I would move the scene of Wonder Woman receiving the email and seeing like the little quick time videos of the Justice League. I would save that to like a post credit scene at the end of the movie, because it does seem kind of weird that like Batman goes, "I thought she was with you. She emailed you 10 minutes ago." So,
I think I
Mhm.
think I think that was down to the Warner Media's executives were just
Yeah.
like, you know what, we need to do this and do that.
Mhm.
But here's some fun fact for you guys. When BVS was coming out, or at least a year out, they had already done some promotional work in Injustice and um what's it called? Well, the Injustice mobile game and
In the
Batman
console.
Arkham and Batman Arkham Knight.
Hmm.
It was already promotional stuff for that. But because they delayed it by a year, it was very difficult for them to kind of put it into the have that into previous games, right?
Hmm.
Um,
True.
but the one thing I do know for a fact is that when these movies were coming out, there was cross promotional stuff with video games. Like
Hmm.
in Injustice 2, we got the Justice League stuff when Justice League came out in 2017. And by the way, I hate that movie. I'm just saying that for facts right now. Um, but at the same time, I think there is nostalgia there because you get to see, you know, some really cool come with cool gears that was inspired by Zack Snyder anyway.
Well,
So
luckily, the way I can justify still using those skins is, guess what? That the characters look exactly the same as Zack Snyder's Justice League. So you know what?
Justice, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just say that they're skins from the Snyderverse. So, but going back, one of the things that I noticed is like in the online discourse of the Snyderverse, people say it's not like the comics, it's not like this. You don't read the comics if you like the Snyderverse. But what these guys are referring to is you didn't read the same comics I did, because I did read comics where honestly the Snyderverse was comic accurate, i.e., Dark Knight freaking Returns, and like any of the new 52. What people don't realize is that Snyder was directly adapting the new 52 comics and the Dark Knight Returns, because pretty much what was going on at the same time as Man of Steel, the new 52.
New 52, and on top of that, there was a whole reshuffling in DC as a
Hmm.
whole.
Yeah,
Like because if you remember, um, back in the day in 2013,
yeah,
also Injustice 1 came out.
yeah.
So that was a big thing because people people were like, "Oh, something new." So, and it was Superman and Batman at the forefront of things, right? If you remember that. And
And bringing the heat. What's up, Jay Heat?
what's
What's
up,
up?
Jay?
So we're talking about why nostalgia is kind of I would say like too much nostalgia is a hindrance on like comic books and comic book media. And we're talking about specifically the Snyderverse, because if you notice, a lot of the criticisms for like the Snyderverse was it's not like the DCAU, which I think is like the stupidest thing in the world.
Now, to be fair, the DCAU is iconic for a reason. It pretty much merged the latter half of the Silver Age, all of the 90s, and a little bit of the early 2000s storylines all into one. That's an entire generation of direct comic book adaptations. So
It's true.
that's a high pedestal to walk on. And fun fact, Infinite Crisis, the second in the Crisis pantheon, was very meta and very nostalgia based. Not
Mhm.
like what we're seeing now by modern writers, where they just blatantly shit on it. What Jeff Johns was going for in Infinite Crisis is how it's basically how you directly complement toxic nostalgia and how it could be used to misconstrue. Have you actually revalued those stories? Have you read them as you got older, or are you just trying to kin them back to your childhood or a simpler time where things aren't as complex and dreary as they are now in reality now that you're older? You can't use nostalgia as a shield from criticism either. Take Dark Crisis Young Justice, for example. If you don't like that period piece, don't shit on it, especially when you're trying to sell something.
Exactly. And also don't crap on your audience, but that's besides the point. That's a little too much for these writers.
And I'm not even all that mad about the Tim Bai chain. to be fair, I'm a '90s kid, and the reason I say that is because let's be honest, the CW Batwoman show heavily damaged Batwoman's brand.
Unfortunately, because she's a great character.
So I could see why they did it, but again, it's just the Bobby Drake situation where they were just chasing where it was a part of all new, all different Marvel. They were trying to stir controversy to get a few headlines, because sales were low, sales were stagnating. It was essentially the comic book sales equivalent of a ratings boost. It was a bad direction to go. Fan baiting is never good business decision.
Mm-mm.
It was just a bad way to go, and Marvel ultimately regretted it. And now DC's stumbling into a similar situation. And to be fair, DC didn't even use fan baiting that much. They just went right back to their edgier storytelling with metal and death metal.
Which that's great because that's
That was
DC's
an
advantage.
Elseworld story. You see, the difference between Marvel and DC is the fact that DC does Elseworld storylines, and that works for them.
Mhm.
And that is a fact. I mean, we did it with Injustice,
Yeah.
Death Metal, Deceased.
Well, parts of Death Metal were Elseworlds, but it was a main continuity book.
Parts of it, though,
Mm-hmm.
not all of it. I'm just talking about parts of it.
Yeah.
But also, like Deceased is an Elseworld story.
Dark Steel.
Dark Knights of Steel. Yep, another Elseworld story arc.
And they did have technically their version of Elseworld stories with What If, but the What If line died, and I didn't even think it made it to the 90s.
You also had Tales of the Dark Multiverse, which was basically their What If.
Oh, the Dark Knights of Steel, another Elseworld story arc, which they're doing currently, which is DC's doing, and it's really good.
Which I love. Really good. Again, a Tom Taylor Elseworlds book. He's good on Elseworlds. Keep him on Elseworlds. But the thing is that actually we encountered this on a recent live stream, is that someone said that for the DC movies, they should make them the way they made them the cartoons. Put the people who made the cartoons in charge. And I'm like, okay.
Oh no!
Here's what you have to realize.
No.
One, those guys are experts at a certain medium. Movies and live action movies and cartoons are way different. Two,
and you get away with a lot more.
Yes. Two. First off, I love how people treat the DCAU like it was, but basically as light as the Super Friends. No.
It was not.
No. The whole reason why here's how you know it was dark. They used a black background in BTAS in order to make it darker. That's the main thing here. But my point is that they also act like let's say it was light or something like that. They act like that storytelling could work nowadays if that was the norm in DC. You could have that, but I maintain, and this is why I always maintain that Man of Steel is a great modern Superman movie, because it's telling the same story, but a modern way. And the problem with people is that, like, particularly with Man of Steel, they took it. It's not like the Christopher Reeves movie that I grew up on. Well, because that movie worked back then.
And even then, the only real detraction from Man of Steel is the Zod ending. In a normal scenario, Clark would have not resorted to just breaking Zod's neck, damaged his spine and crippled him, but he wouldn't have gone for the neck snap, not immediately. So he didn't do it immediately, though. The actual forcing of killing Zod was a rather forced situation if you actually take the time to script it and play it beat for beat. It was a rather forced scene. Superman would have gone for a few broken bones or maybe just outright crippled Zod, but he wouldn't have resorted to a neck snap.
Well, I think the scenario he was in set that up because there was no other way he was going to save those people.
Punch him in the eye, punch him right in the iris, distort his heat vision.
Okay, but my point is, and I agree with you on that. That was just David S. Goyer's writing. It wasn't necessarily that had nothing to do with Snyder. But my point is that. Yeah, people were like, he's not the Christopher Reeves Superman. He doesn't smile every 30 seconds. And I'm like, he's not supposed to be Christopher Reeves.
He's supposed to be the New 52 version.
Yeah, exactly.
And this also plays to the DeCambu as well. New 52 Superman was a jackass. Rightfully so, considering what he had gone through.
I love him. I love jackass Superman.
But come on, let's call for what it is. New 52 Superman was a jackass.
Here's the difference between the New 52 and, because you got to remember, towards the end of New 52, which was in 2016, they had to take some elements from the so-called deaths of
From
deaths of
pre-Flashpoint, go ahead, Talia.
yes,
Pre-Flashpoint.
from pre-Flashpoint. They have to take some elements from that and put it into the movies.
Mhm.
But you remember with the death of Superman, the resurrection, and furthermore, there's the suit as well. If you remember, like no, well, I'm not
I
gonna.
get it. I get what you're saying, Talia, because they were
What-
trying to make this a Batman movie and a Batman movie and a Superman sequel at the same time.
You can't do
Yeah.
that. Actually, what's interesting, going back to the beginning of Rebirth and the end of New 52, you know what they could have done to satisfy both sides?
Go on.
They didn't have to kill the New 52 Superman. They could have just said, okay, there's another Superman, and use the post-crisis Superman as like the one for the nostalgic fans, and given the newer fans who like the New 52 Superman, their guy.
Now, I will admit
it wouldn't-
merging them was an admitted defeat. I will give Jared that.
That was stupid.
That was an admitted defeat.
It was a cool
But that-
story, but it was stupid.
But that ultimately, the only way that would have genuinely worked is if you had pre-Flashpoint / post-crisis Superman be a mentor to his New 52 counterpart.
Yeah, they could have done that.
And help him develop from his dickish tendencies.
Take his tendencies. Yeah. Well, actually, what's interesting is that when you look at where the New 52 Superman was at the end of his life, he was at least close to the Superman that we all remember as Superman. In other words, what the New 52 was doing is showing the characters growing up, learning how to use their powers, and then becoming those characters that we know. That's why they started off so young.
And they tried to cram into a 5-year span, with the only exception of Batman and Green Lantern, who got 10 years.
Yeah, Batman, Green Lantern, they're like, okay, so Blackest Night happened, even though half the characters that are important in Blackest Night don't exist in this version of the universe.
It just, New 52 should have been its own separate Elseworld continuity and then expand from there. Kind of like what they did with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman Year One.
Actually, you know what's interesting? It is now because the Doomsday Clock.
The less said about Doomsday Clock, I mean, as much as I want to appreciate Doomsday Clock and all the Jeff Johns of our projects, Dan Dido, through his projects and their relevance so far to the wayside, it's practically Black Label at this point.
But what I mean is that they did establish Earth 52, which is that Earth. So yeah. I'm like, okay, at least you're saying, hey, if you like that universe, it hasn't been completely destroyed. It exists.
Yes.
Which I'm like, that's fine. I will gladly read my New 52 trades as Elseworld stories.
I don't know why they didn't think of this. If they ever want to do like a DeCamu revival in comic book form, just say Earth 52.
What they should do, use it as the ultimate DC universe, because that's kind of what it was. Except don't make the same mistakes that Ultimate Marvel made.
No, Ultimate is arguably worse, because at least DeCamu was just overly edgy. Ultimates was borderline grotesque.
No, but
Wanda and Quicksilver.
What I mean is that it's the concept of, okay, you have a universe with not as much continuity, and that you can change and
do whatever.
To tell newer storylines and provide a jumping on point for new fans. I'm not talking about make it like Ultimates. I'm talking about the concept of a side universe.
Of course.
But which, when you think about it, that was to say what you want about the New 52. It brought a crap ton of new fans on because you didn't have to know anything.
It collapsed in on itself, especially with Future's End, but we're not going to talk about that.
But it wasn't supported. That's why, because they didn't commit to a reboot, and that's the problem with it. And that's honestly nostalgia winning out, because you know what they did? They kept all Batman and Green Lantern because they had like the best storylines. But with guys, you could have just told those storylines with the New 52 Batman and such, and just done that. They could have had I think what they could have done is skipped Grayson and just had him as Nightwing and say that happened. That would have been fine. But when they tried to fit 5 Robins in 4 years, it doesn't work.
Actually, it was only referenced in a throwaway line, but actually Batman and Green Lantern debuted 5 years before the rest of the league. So they had a total of 10 years. So Batman is a bit more explainable in that context. You weren't going to get the whole Bat family, but you would have gotten the main Robins at least within that 5-10 year window.
No, I didn't know that. But the whole idea about how they tried to fit like Blackest Night when
Oh, that
these
was gonna
characters don't
happen.
exist.
That
I was like,
was
no.
that was not gonna happen.
Yeah, they tried to say that's canon, but I'm like, okay, I'm gonna call bullshit on that one. But that's a lot. I want to ask you, particularly as a Superman fan,
Yes.
what do you think about like the way that fans, I say air quotes fans because these people aren't fans, when they won't let the character grow and won't let newer stories that are basically telling the same thing. But would you think of the criticism that people said to Henry Cavill? That again, you kind of brushed on this, that he wasn't the Christopher Reeve Superman.
Well, it's because at the time, Cavill wasn't given the creative freedom that he has now, right?
Exactly.
And he was, and the fact is, now that he's got the creative freedom to build on his Superman character and to take elements from, let's say, the New 52, take elements from Rebirth, take elements from pre post crisis, and furthermore, it's like he also might take elements from uh Injustice games. I can see that happening, because you gotta remember they're gonna go back to the they're not going back to the old storyboards, but they're gonna go back to the new. They're gonna go refer
New era.
themselves the new storyboards,
Retooling, so to speak. They're gonna retool
retooling.
something.
They're gonna
They're gonna
retool
retool some
something.
things, but they're gonna keep the overall like Snyder plan, and that Darkseid's gonna invade. Maybe they'll
Yeah,
keep the evil Superman thing. I doubt they will, but they'll do
No, that's
something
gone.
like that. That's
The
gone.
Nightmare
that's
verse is the
gone.
first thing out.
That's gone. But the nightmare scene that could be gone, but I can still see them, going for the fact that Final Crisis is the big
Oh
event.
yes, absolutely. That's what I
Definitely.
think
But
Justice League 2 is gonna be. I mean, whichever Justice League movie Zack Snyder directs is gonna be final. It's gonna be a Final Crisis like movie.
yeah, and
Essentially.
and quote unquote, right? I still believe that Zach will come back.
Oh yeah,
I truly believe that. I don't
eventually.
eventually, because he's still got that 2-year contract with Netflix, right?
Hopefully
2025
too.
at the absolute earliest.
No, it won't be 2025. It'll be
Well,
earliest. It'll be 2024, right?
I think he'll at least be a producer, like maybe by end of next year, he'll like say, okay,
Yeah.
I'll help you guys out. But yeah, Justice League, I would say that the next Snyder DC movie would probably come out like, again, 2024, 2025 at the earliest.
Yeah, because you got to remember, DC at the moment have to pedal themselves and get themselves out of the hole that they've dug themselves into, which was not
Hamada,
no
Dido, and the fact
So you're
no
that
no
telling me DC is like, somebody save
uh,
me?
no, they have to dig themselves out of a hole and
some
get
Alice
themselves.
in Wonderland type shit because the Hamada regime. Woo,
No, but it's not only the Hamada regime. You gotta remember, this wasn't WB at the time. This was under Warner Media and AT&T. And AW Warner Media and AT&T did not like the fact of what Snyder was doing. They did not like what they didn't want Cavill back. Period.
Yeah.
They didn't want Cavill back in any DC films, whether it was Shazam, whether it was
Which is funny because if they didn't want him back, they should have just recast it and been done with it so they can keep
yeah.
bringing Superman.
Yeah, they could have still brought Superman back to the forefront of things, but they never did. And now with the new regime, is like they're taking elements from Flashpoint. They're bringing elements. They're bringing loads of different elements from different comics, which I really like
And
for the
what I
they
Flash
love,
film.
they
what I
wasted
love,
5 years throwing crap at the wall and seeing where it stuck.
and
The only
arguably nothing really stuck. But the thing
there's
I
only
do,
one film.
yeah,
The only
Shazam, Aquaman, and the first Wonder Woman movie. That's
well, the
it.
first one of them was in the SnyderVerse, so I didn't even
yeah,
count that as like what we're talking about right now. But
but it's like I was gonna say the
yeah,
first Aquaman film. I would classify that as SnyderVerse
yeah,
because
Okay.
that's
Okay.
pretty much. There are some like contradictions, but it's not too much that it breaks it breaks continuity
continuity.
that
Yeah,
much.
yeah, exactly, and that's why I think that movie still stands as part of the DCEU.
Me too.
So that's what I feel, and that's nostalgia there because they took elements from New 52 heavily on that film, You
And
really did.
to be clear, actually, that's a good place to go to, Taladia. Let's talk about. I need to put the banner on here. Let's talk about good nostalgia, because arguably that's what they're doing now too. Because what DC is doing now, I mean, under James Gunn, under what this new regime seems to be doing. First off, they're respecting that the Snyderverse happened, that Zack Snyder's contribution to the DCEU happened, because arguably the regime just wanted to completely annihilate everything Snyder. I'm talking about the old regime. They wanted to eliminate everything Snyder ever contributed. This new regime
And
is like,
I don't even think it's so much they just don't get me wrong, they did Snyder dirty with it, given everything that happened, but I don't think they genuinely just disliked the guy. It was just a clashing of egos.
yeah, exactly.
No, it's not only the clashing of egos. We got to also remember in the with the old regime, they pretty much didn't want any old actor to come from the Snyderverse to come back. Whether it's Ben Affleck's Batman,
except for like the ones that would be financial suicide if they didn't, like Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa.
Yeah,
they had to keep them.
They had to keep them, and Ezra Miller. They had to keep them because of the
Was Ezra Miller a financial success though?
No,
or
but they already had so much money invested in the Flash that they couldn't stop with it.
Yeah, they couldn't stop with it, so that's why it's still continuing on with the Flash film.
Yeah.
But we do know this much, right? At least with the new regime, because there's this big deadline article that came out a few days back. They want to make a big cohesive universe,
which I'm happy for. Go ahead.
And they're talking about not only films, animation, and TV shows, but they're also talking about video games.
Yes. And that's what I love, is that because here's the thing. It seems like now all eras of DC are being respected, because that's what I wanted. That's why the Snyderverse, if we're operating under the assumption that the Snyderverse fandom is quote unquote toxic, this is why it happened, because the previous regime basically said, okay, so those
shame.
Yes, those movies you guys like, they never happen. They're not important. They suck. Now, granted, there are still some people that want Zack Snyder to run every part of DC, which I don't want that, because too far in the opposite direction. But the mainstream Snyderverse community just says we just want our stuff to be respected, and maybe bring Zack Snyder back for like a movie to finish up his arc. Because if he finishes up his arc, okay, cool. He got the chance.
We'll call it a day.
Yeah, it's not exactly what we want to see, but you know what? We'll take this compromise.
Yeah, exactly.
And these hacks, no, I don't even respect them as executives. These hacks had the gall to disrespect and dehumane Autumn's tragic suicide as a cop out to out him.
Yes, exactly. That is disgusting. That alone, I'm like, you know what? I'm glad that you guys are out of a job, because you know what? That alone is fireable.
Jared, sorry, I respect the brand of what we're building here, but I gotta use my one rule. I gotta use my one curse rule.
All right, don't worry. I'll bleep it out. Go ahead.
You got what you fucking deserve.
Yeah, exactly. Boom.
So, but like for me though, like I don't think that any Hollywood executive will actually pick up on the old regime. I don't.
Oh hell no, they're black.
No,
they're black.
No.
I don't think Netflix has already said no to them. Yeah. I also know that Apple won't take them on, because I think Apple's like, no,
because this is what happens when you're vindictive against a creative just because you didn't like his creative direction. You could have at least gone to Snyder and said, okay, so can you try and direct it toward this? And Snyder would have said, just give me Justice League, because I promise you it is getting to that point.
And trust me, when I tell you guys, from what I know, is that Snyder will come back, but he'll come back not in a big capacity. He will have
probably a producer credit. Probably a producer.
He'll have his pivotal role in the DCU.
Because can you imagine if the leadership of so we have the Council of Creatives, and it's made up of James Wan, Patty Jenkins, Zack Snyder, James Gunn, all of the really good directors of DC. Can you imagine we get the dream team back to assemble the Justice League, in other words?
Don't forget, Alan Horn.
Oh, Alan Horn, baby.
Alan Horn is also going to be a senior advisor to David Zaslav. So imagine what we're going to get going forward now, right? Imagine a Superman game, right?
Yes.
That is going to be set between Black Adam and the next Superman film. Imagine that, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
that could actually work out for DCU, right? And a
Mhm.
Batman game, if they choose to do it, another one. It doesn't have to even be Kevin Conroy. Rest in peace, Kevin Conroy. But it doesn't even have to be, the Arkham games. But they can use the DCEU template, and they could do that Batman versus Deathstroke thing. A prequel like type of
Yeah.
game, which would definitely work, and
Or
fans would
honestly,
eat it.
here's the thing. What I hope DC keeps up though is whenever they come out with a movie, have like prequel comics because that's actually a really good idea to promote the comics. And like even with games, comics that give you DLC, encourage people to buy it.
Yes,
But that
yes.
gambit, Fortnite's been making a killing off that, but that can only go so far, especially if the game's not worthwhile.
I mean,
But
but we gotta remember the new regime. They've already they've said to an article of Deadline that they want to have everything, including gaming as well. It's like it's a really big deal for them.
that would be really. Oh, you mean essentially a tie-in game to the DCU now?
Yes,
That's
like
great.
I mean, if they are going down the road to that, it's going to tie in games to the DCU. I think that would work.
Mhm.
They don't even need to have Henry Cavill voice stuff. I mean, they tried it back in the 2000s when they did Batman Begins, Superman Returns, Green Lantern. They tried those types of movie tie-in games that didn't really work because the movie already came out, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if they did a prequel to the movie, that would work, and that would get people to go to the cinemas. That would get people to go to watch these films, and furthermore, you could even have these games tell tell the story, tell the stories of previous DC films, right? So to say, right? So the
Yeah, you
Yeah.
know,
Snyderverse.
it's a Black Adam game. I would love a Black Adam game where I just kick everyone's ass. That'd be
Oh,
so
wait.
good.
I mean, Black Adam's already in. They got a skin for him in Injustice 2 mobile already, and it's The Rock, by the way. It's
I
literally
want
The
them
Rock.
to. Why can't they just drop skins in the console version too? I'm like, what is going on
It's
with this
because the
deal?
model. It's because the model that they
It's
put in the game.
complex.
Okay.
It's too complex for them to
Well,
have.
hopefully Injustice 3 they can maybe start doing
Well,
something.
speaking about Injustice 3,
Please.
speaking about
Drum
Injustice
roll,
3,
please.
I know Ed Boon did a Q&A last night, and it was pretty interesting. And somebody asked him, "Is the next game a sequel game? Is the next game a sequel?" And he says, "If you call Injustice 3 or MK12 sequels, then likely."
Yes!
Could
Thank
go
So
either
you.
way. Could go either way.
Could go
it
either
could go either
way.
way.
Either
It could
way,
go,
I'm fine because I love both games.
yeah. But if it's
I prefer
Injustice,
the first timeline better, but it's still solid, unlike what Star
it
Wars
is.
has become.
I mean, imagine an Injustice 3 game, but they'll have to recast Batman anyway because
Yeah,
at
they're
the end
gonna
of the
have
day,
to.
they're gonna
Mhm.
have to.
I hate.
But back to my point though, when it comes down to the DCU stuff, right?
Mhm.
Um, they can do like the DCU games, and then they can also do the Elseworld games, and they could still work in a cohesive universe. It could all work out for DC, and this could actually make Marvel look like crap. This should
And
actually
honestly,
look like
what
Marvel.
they could do, just do the original storyboards as a comic series,
Do you know what?
a
I
Black
would.
Label comic series. There you
Take
go.
Bruce X Lois out, and it's
Well,
salvageable.
take that out because
That
that
was
was
a stupid
always
idea.
changed. That was always changed because remember that was from like an early rough draft of the storyboards. I'm talking about the storyboards before he changed them, but after he took out the Bruce Lois thing.
But you know who I would love to write those comics though?
Who?
Jim Lee to
You
do
mean
the
draw?
artwork.
Yes.
Jim,
Uh,
let Jim Lee do the artwork. I mean, he
Jason
did the
Fabok, maybe I would say.
no, because you gotta remember, Jay. He did do old storyboards. You gotta remember
he
that.
did. He
J,
did.
J, Jim Lee
He
did.
did.
So if
I
he
wouldn't
does a
trust Jim Lee in a full writing capacity, but I definitely let him do
No,
the
he
art.
means art. He means art.
Okay,
the
I was about to
artwork,
say. I was
no,
about to say.
the artwork, yeah. But in terms of writing, who would I would love to see write?
Dan
Maybe
Jurgens. Dan Jurgens is pretty solid.
But
maybe Scott Snyder, maybe.
Scott Snyder, probably. I could see that.
Scott Snyder could pull it off.
So technically, it'd be Zack and Scott Snyder's Justice League. Just call it that. That's the title.
Because guys, we gotta talk about this, right? The fact is, Scott Snyder wrote the best comic of all the Batman, which is the new
Court of Owls
52s.
trilogy is a modern classic. I'll give you that.
Wait, hang on.
Right, Court of Owls is a modern classic, and not only that, Scott Snyder had his handprint on Gotham Knights,
Yep.
which is facts, and his stuff was expanded on in Gotham Knights. But I'll say this much, right? When it goes forward, when the DCU goes fully blossomed, because we're still like a couple of years out before the next DC slate, because I think the DC slate that we're gonna get next will probably be next year.
Mhm.
I think after that, after like Aquaman, Flash, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, Aquaman, and the Flash, and so on and so forth, and after Wonder Woman, I think we're gonna get like a full slate of what's gonna come and what's not gonna come.
And honestly, I'm excited because on this new regime, I think I'm really excited because here's the thing: James Gunn even did like a poll, and he said, "Okay, so what characters do you guys want to see made movies of?" Which, granted, that could backfire really bad, but he's involving the fans. That's key. He's like, "What do you guys want to see?"
It's showing good faith, even if it's a hollow gesture. It's showing good faith from a brand perspective.
Yeah, because particularly if you're looking at what we just went through for the past 5 years of them saying, "No, we know what you want. You don't know what you want." I'm like, I'm pretty sure we do.
And I don't know how you guys, and it is technically double casting, but if they did Jason Momoa as Lobo, I think you could pull it off. It'd be worth it.
Yeah,
double
because
casting.
they could make him look different than he is now, and then there you go. That's done.
But would you have to alter Lobo though? Just don't have Aquaman in that film. Problem solved. You could avoid the double casting.
Yeah, it's true.
True, but before I go, because I gotta go eat and stuff.
Okay.
I'll leave this on a high note for you guys, right?
All right.
Expect big things coming from DC games, right? Expect big things, right?
Mhm.
And furthermore, before I say everything, subscribe to Jared on his YouTube page. Make sure you get him up to with the goal of 400, and also help Jay Heat get his YouTube channel up as well. And if you help them both out, and also try and get me up to 300, I'm on that road to 300 as well. So I'm sure Jared will put in the description. So once we get to that goal, guys, I'll be having these guys on my show. By the way, before we reach 300 next
Awesome.
week. Well, by the time you watch it, you already know that it's going to be the 19th of November. We'll be doing a show on my channel, and we'll be talking about everything in DC. So, take care, everyone. Peace.
See you. So, Jay Heat, real quick. So, going back to nostalgia, I think what's interesting is that it also gets into like as comic book fans when like a new writer enters, starts writing a book, because it's like you'll have like, heck, we have a great example of this. Tevya, he's constantly saying, okay, so bring back John Kent because and more power to him. He likes that version of the character more. That's totally fine.
And it's more sellable.
It's more, arguably, it's the better version of the character. But my point is that what a lot of people don't realize, and actually Comic Historian had a fantastic way of thinking about this. You have to treat each individual writer as a new version of the character. Like,
I agree.
Like,
I agree.
Scott Snyder's Batman is way different than Tom King's Batman.
The less said about Tom King's Batman, the better.
The beginning part was good. Up until the wedding, it was decent. But my point is that a lot of fans tend to think that their favorite versions are the only legitimate versions of the characters, and this gets back to when I did a video on on how there's no real definitive version of these characters. Because here's the thing: these characters have existed for 70 years. There is no like, this is the one version of the character that's valid, because you've had like the New 52, the SnyderVerse, all these different versions. It's fine if you don't like that particular version, But if you say it's not Batman, guess what? He is. He has the Batman name and the DC logo. That's the only thing that qualifies that thing as a valid version of the character.
And I will say this about Super Sons. And if you're going from a pure sales standpoint, it was mid. From a pure sales standpoint.
It was mid, yeah.
It was mid. But it wasn't aggressively mid, like, say, Riri Williams, Ironheart, or the Champion.
Riri was just bad.
I'm going from a purely number standpoint. Now, if you want to go into commercial and quality, then yes, it was horrendous, especially when they had her take over Iron Man for those 20 issues. And don't get me started on the Rick Grayson saga, but
Grayson or the Drake saga from Young Justice. God damn it,
that actually had a bit of a nuance to it, because think about it. Whether it's from a marketing standpoint, in terms of the Bat family, Tim was snubbed by Damian. And although those two have learned to tolerate each other, it doesn't change the fact that Tim was still insecure over what happened, and he spiraled into an identity crisis.
But you make your superhero name your last name? That's stupid.
What about Artemis from Young Justice, or Artemis in mythology? Some code name, it depends. In a pure superhero aspect, it's stupid. Now, if Young Justice was more akin to like the Earth 16 TV show, where it was a pure covert team, then yeah, you could use Drake as a code name. But that's purely in a reconnaissance standpoint, kind of like a James Bond super spy type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of super, especially if you still under Batman's brand and how you have to be menacing, I'm sorry, but a duck is not menacing outside of a pond of water. I'm sorry.
Yeah, a duck is not menacing. That's good. I love that.
But I get what Bendis was trying to do with that, but making him the Drake and modeling it after his evil Earth 3 counterpart was not the way to go.
And revealing Superman's secret identity. By the way, we'll do a stream where we just rant about Bendis Superman, because guess what? That's a stream in and of its own. But
he literally just ripped off Truth in the New 52.
Yeah, and did it in a horrible way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have my own problems with the Truth storyline, but it was better than what Bendis did. But my point is that the thing is that and also actually Bendis is a good example. A lot of what he did with like changes to Connor Kent's costume and all that stuff was based upon his own nostalgia taking over and realizing, does this work nowadays with like the bad hair and everything?
I get where you're coming from, but you got to understand. But Jeff Johns 2003, come on. That was come on. That characterization.
I'm not talking about characterization. I'm talking about the look of the character.
I see where you're coming from.
Had it been like the shaved head, the short hair, and the jacket, fine. But
yeah, that would have been a good
hair.
That would have been a good compromise. That would have been a good compromise.
The really stupid 90s hair combined with everything looks dumb as hell.
It does. I'm not denying that. But we got Bart Allen back in relevance.
Okay,
we had Amethyst. There was some good things. There was some good things about Bendis' Wonder Comics. But that was only like 2 books out of his whole line.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of DC's baggage was just sucking up to Bendis. Barely. He wasn't doing anything with Marvel. He had dipped. His quality.
Yeah, because when you look at like Siege, compare it to like Civil War II, I'm like, what just happened? Like, what? What are you doing, dude? I get what you're trying to do, but you're not doing it well. Because Siege is like one of my favorite Marvel events of all time, and
it's a good story. It's a good story. I'm not doing that.
Secret Invasion. I'm like, what are you doing here? This isn't working.
And Bendis just, I don't know if it was for brand purposes or because he was such a high profile writer, but they had to have known Bendis had fallen off compared to the tier he used to be.
Yeah, because we think it's sad because DC. Can you imagine if DC got the Bendis from Ultimate Spider-Man?
Oh yes. Oh, we'd be in a way better position.
We've been away. Well, and first off, they should have given him a street level character because Bendis does not write well for like
higher tier
godlike characters like Superman. They could have given him Batwoman or maybe Nightwing.
I wouldn't have trusted him with Batwoman or Nightwing. Maybe Green Arrow, somewhere like high C, low B tier.
But actually, if you read his Batman from when they had those Walmart books, that was actually really good.
Okay, okay.
I could have seen him doing a pretty decent Batman, honestly, when I think about it.
Yeah.
Because he writes better with the street level characters, like Spider-Man.
They're more relatable.
Yeah, that's fine. You can do that. I'm totally fine with that. But the problem is also with the Superman is that they gave him also action as well.
They gave him both, and they just did Patrick Gleason dirty. Giving Bendis Superman of all people was an honest to God mistake. It was the stupidest thing the higher ups editorial could have possibly have done.
I think that was actually part of the reason why he came over is because he wanted Superman. They should have said, I don't think you would do well with Superman.
Nah. We'll give you Wonder Comics. We'll give you your own subline. I can't guarantee you fully taking over Superman ongoing. Maybe an story arc or two with a collaboration with Patrick Gleason, but
and let's not forget what he did with John Kent. And Tevi is going to back me up on that one.
That's true. But to be fair, that was more so for Bendis' own convenience. And let's be honest, John was going through a lot of internalization for a 10-year-old kid, for a preteen.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest. Even though I don't warrant how it was executed, I can understand why he did it, because that's a lot of internalization for a child to go through. I wouldn't have aged him up all the way to 17. Maybe right at 13. That way he's already in that teen echelon. And then you could have just stuck him in a roster, Damian Wayne's Teen Titan. And Adam Glass book with John in it, that would have been a whole lot better.
And you can still do the Superman raising his son book, because that's part of why everyone loved
that was the
Rebirth Superman.
That was the appeal of Rebirth.
Because it was a new thing. We've never seen Superman as a father because he hasn't had the main continuity Superman hasn't had a kid before Rebirth.
Well, he did have Val Zod's son, Chris Kent, but that was recently.
Not his own son.
Yeah.
But and that's beyond the point. But the thing is that when you approach all these different versions of the characters, that's what they are. By the way, you can't expect the movie versions to 100% reflect the comic versions or the animated versions, because they make certain changes to these characters based upon the audience. The movie audience, they have to try and make these characters appeal to the general movie audience, because if they're operating under the false assumption, and I did say false assumption, that whenever someone sees a comic book movie, they go, I want to read that comic book. They kind of have to like make it so the person is in. So the general thing is not like, well, that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. That's why they characterize Superman in the way they did, because guess what? No one's going to believe that nowadays. They didn't in the Reeves version, and that's fine. That's for that time period. But no one's going to believe that like this dude crash lands and he's all hunky-dory, everything's fine, and the world automatically trusts him if he has God powers.
It's not even so much that, because you got to take the Paul Kent stuff into account. I mean, first of all, Superman is more so like Moses. Even if you tie that more even back to his original creators. Superman was more of a Moses allegory than full-blown Jesus Christ. And what was the script writer for Man of Steel? I keep forgetting his name. Goyer, thank you. He kept hammering that the Jesus allegory, even with the floating T. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't work with the larger symbol of what Superman's supposed to represent from an immigration standpoint, from crossing in terms of the Judaism experience. It just doesn't work in that direct context. If anything, that would be more akin to a character with a God complex, something like Homelander. And I know he's a Superman ripoff, but if you really want to go that far, God, just thinking about it.
I see what you're saying there, but my point is that they have to like make these characters more generally appealing in order for some. Because here's the thing: there's a reason why so many of my close friends and family that aren't comic book fans were like, "Oh, Superman's really boring," because they're only really exposed to the Christopher Reeves movie. And to tell you the truth, there's a reason why that movie doesn't hold up today when you're looking at it from a modern mindset. Because in the post 9/11 world, someone shows up with God powers, no one's going to automatically trust that guy. If anything, the media reaction to him in BVS, that is legitimately how they would react. And the way Superman reacted to humanity, that's the way, honestly, anyone would react if he was trying to help people and they kept treating him like he was a threat.
I agree. Now, I will concede you could have used the DCAU as a base, but I wouldn't make it a direct correlation. Like the characters, and if you really wanted Superman to be very optimistic, there's a difference between Superman being optimistic and seeing the hope in people, and just being all smiles, hunky dory, because you can't really have that in live action.
Arguably, he did see the he didn't come out and say it. That's the problem also with like a lot of detractors, because they want him to straight up and say it. Oh my gosh, all we need is hope and stuff. But he did see the hope in everyone, because that's why he gave his life for everyone.
That's who Superman is.
That's who Superman is. He doesn't have to keep saying it. He just has to. Well, let me put it this way: actions speak louder than words. He did the actions. He got Batman, the 20-year crime-fighting veteran who was straight up branding people to become a more hopeful version of Batman.
And I will say, again, it could be modernism. It could be just trying to hype up the biggest storylines and the marketing team. But trying to make BVS a Batman movie, Man of Steel hybrid was not the way to go.
No. They should have just done a Superman movie and had Batman be the villain, or a Batman movie and maybe started off with Superman as the antagonist. He's not really the antagonist, and then eventually they team up. Or they should have just done a Batman Superman team up, and
or
then
just
Batman
adapt the World's Finest episode.
Yeah.
Or just adapt the World's Finest episode from DCAU, a Joker Lex Luthor team up.
You could still do the whole Batman brands people and Superman is trying to like guide him more toward the hopeful part, but you don't have to have like them fighting.
Or just have a simple flashback scene of Jason Todd Robin dying and Bruce being disillusioned from it.
See, the problem with that is that, guess what? The World's Finest thing happened. Well, actually, no, it didn't. But here's the thing. With the popularity of The Dark Knight Returns, it did kind of establish a arguably annoying precedent that whenever Batman and Superman first meet, they are going to fight. No matter how long. I mean, even in World's Finest, they meet and Batman throws Superman over his shoulder.
Yeah, but that was a petty skirmish and a pseudo dogfight over Lois, if you're counting the subplots with Bruce Wayne. That was more so petty banter. There was some friction and rivalry in the early part of that crossover, but it was mostly banter.
True. So, yeah, I do agree with you. It would have been better if they did a World's Finest movie and just gone with that. Because, first off, I don't think that Batman needed his own origin movie. We get the whole Batman origin. Arguably,
or just base it right, or just slightly retcon the ending The Dark Knight Rises, and okay, the only way that would work.
You can't. I wouldn't do that. I don't want Robin to show up.
No, or just don't have him be Batman. Just have him be Nightwing, and then Bruce has his little happily ever after with Selina. Then you have the world changing with Clark after Man of Steel, and I'm like, I got to look into this. I know I'm not what I used to be, but I got to look into this.
So you want Nightwing's name to be Robin?
No, I want the Robin.
So stupid, Nolan. We'll talk about that when we do the stream on Dark Knight Rises. But oh my gosh, that's one of the many reasons why Dark Knight Rises is the weakest of those three movies.
You didn't want to call him Dick, just refer to him as Richard. That's all you had to do.
Or Tim. Just do Tim.
Nah, then you would have pissed some. No.
No, but here's why it works more.
Skip Jason Todd. It's one thing if you skip Jason Todd, because a lot of people did that due to the infamy of that character and what happened to him. But if you skipped Dick Grayson as the first Robin, you literally pissed off 3 generations at once.
But arguably, that dude was more of Tim because he was more of a detective.
Oh, yeah, he definitely had a more Tim Drake-centered mindset, but you would have had to call him Richard due to the mainstream.
I agree with you. They could have just combined them, kind of like amalgam them into one character and just call him Richard Grayson, just have him be Nightwing.
Sprinkled a little Tim Drake in there, kind of like what the DCAU did with Tim and Jason Todd.
Yeah, kind of. So that's kind of what I think they should have done, but we've been going for about an hour, so I'm going to call this one. Jay Heath, thanks for coming on. Thanks to Ladia. Will be going live. So at the time this is Sunday, we're going to be talking about Dark Knight, episode 2 at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. Eastern, talking about Dark Knight, the second movie of the Nolan trilogy. And then
Rest in peace, Heath Ledger.
Rest in peace, Heath Ledger. And then next week we're going to be talking about Dark Knight Rises. And then I think let's do this. The week after the Nolan movies, we're going to talk about the Dark Knight Returns animated movie. I got a request for that. We might parts 1 and 2. We'll just do them all as one movie. We're not splitting that up into 2 streams. We will be doing that.
All right.
So stay heroic, everyone, and I will see you in the next one.